The fluorescent lights of County General Emergency Room hummed with a cold, sterile buzz that seemed to suck all the warmth right out of the air. It was 2:37 in the morning, that dead hour when the night felt heaviest, and even the coffee tasted like regret. The smell of antiseptic mixed with something sharper, the metallic tang of blood from a trauma bay down the hall. Rain hammered against the windows like it was trying to break in, and somewhere in the waiting area, a baby cried in short, exhausted bursts. Dr. Jake Thompson stood at the nurse's station, scrolling through his tablet, his white coat crisp, but his eyes carrying the weight of a 12-hour shift that still had 4 more to go. The automatic doors slid open with a hiss, letting in a gust of cold October air, and the unmistakable rumble of motorcycle engines from the parking lot. Jake looked up and felt his spine stiffen. A man walked in, and everything about him screamed trouble. He was massive, easily 6'4", with shoulders like a linebacker, and arms covered in tattoos that crawled up past his neck. His leather vest was soaked from the rain, and even from 20 feet away, Jake could see the Iron Horse's patches blazing in red and white. The man's face was weathered, hard lines carved by years of something Jake didn't want to imagine. A deep gash ran across his forearm, dripping blood onto the polished hospital floor. If you believe in fairness, second chances, and treating every person with dignity, then please like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight, because stories like this remind us that sometimes the people we judge the hardest are the ones who deserve our respect the most. The biker approached the front desk, and Jake intercepted him before he could reach the nurse. His name was Hank Callahan, though Jake didn't know that yet, and he wouldn't bother to ask. Hank held his bleeding arm against his chest, his face tight with pain, but his voice calm. He said he needed stitches, that he had cut himself on some metal during a benefit run. Jake looked at him, at the tattoos, the vest, the rough hands, and made his decision in 3 seconds flat. He told the nurse to call security. He said this looked like gang violence, and they had a protocol. He looked Hank dead in the eye and said he wouldn't be treating any criminal in his emergency room. His voice was loud enough that half the waiting room turned to stare. Hank didn't flinch. He just looked at Jake with something that wasn't anger, but something closer to disappointment, like he had seen this movie too many times before. He asked Jake if he was sure about that. Jake crossed his arms and said absolutely. Security could escort him out, or he could leave on his own. Either way, he wasn't getting treated here. Hank nodded slowly. He reached into his vest pocket, and Jake tensed. But what came out was just a worn leather wallet. Hank pulled out a business card and set it gently on the counter. Then he turned and walked back toward the doors, blood still dripping from his arm, leaving a trail of red dots on the white floor. The nurse picked up the card first. Her face went pale. She handed it to Jake without a word. He read it once, then twice, then felt his stomach drop through the floor. Hank Stone Callahan, Chairman, Callahan Foundation, Primary Benefactor, County General Medical Center. Jake's hands started to shake. The Callahan Foundation had donated $14 million to this hospital over the past 5 years. They funded the new children's ward. They paid for the cancer center. They covered equipment, scholarships, research grants. The man Jake had just humiliated and thrown out was single-handedly responsible for keeping this hospital running. Within an hour, the head of medicine was standing in Jake's office. Dr. Eleanor Hayes was a small woman with silver hair, and the kind of presence that made residents stand at attention. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. She simply asked Jake to explain why the hospital's largest donor had called her personal cell phone at 3 in the morning to say he was bleeding at a filling station parking lot because one of her doctors refused to treat him. Jake tried to explain. The tattoos, the vest, the way Hank looked. Dr. Hayes held up her hand. She told Jake that Hank Callahan had been riding hogs for 42 years, that he started his construction business with nothing and built it into a $300 million enterprise. That he had been doing charitable work with local hospitals, schools, and veterans organizations since before Jake was born. That tonight, Hank and his club had been on mile 200 of a 500-mile benefit run to raise money for homeless veterans. The blood on his arm came from helping free a trapped dog from a collapsed fence on the highway. Dr. Hayes paused and let the silence do its work. Then she told Jake that Hank didn't want an apology. He didn't want Jake fired. He had called simply to ask one question. He wanted to know if this was how all patients who looked different were treated at County General. Because if so, he said, maybe his $14 million should go somewhere that remembered what healing actually meant. The next morning, Jake stood outside a small bike shop on the edge of town. His white coat was gone, replaced by a plain sweater, and he had never felt more exposed in his life. Hank was inside, his arm now properly bandaged, working on an old hog with one hand. Jake stepped through the door, and Hank looked up, but didn't speak. Jake said he was sorry, not because of the money, not because of his job, but because he had looked at a bleeding man and seen a label instead of a person. He had forgotten why he became a doctor in the first place. Hank wiped his good hand on a rag and studied Jake for a long moment. Then he nodded toward a chair and told him to sit. He said that when he was 23, a doctor had refused to treat his mother because she didn't have insurance. She died in a waiting room while paperwork got sorted out. That was why he donated. Not for buildings or names on plaques, but so that no one would ever feel what he felt that night. He told Jake that he didn't need his apology. What he needed was for Jake to promise that the next person who walked through those emergency room doors, no matter what they looked like, would be treated like a human being. Jake's eyes stung with tears he didn't try to hide. He gave Hank his word. And before we end, we have one special request for you. Comment below with the words, "Respect has no dress code," to show that you stand against prejudice in all its forms, because sometimes the person we judge as dangerous is the same person who has been quietly saving lives all along. Hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss a story that reminds us that true character, it isn't about the leather jacket you're wearing or the bike you're riding. It's about what you do when no one is watching. It's about the choices you make in the face of adversity and the kindness you extend to those who need it most. Because ultimately, those are the things that define us, not what we project to the world, but the quiet acts of compassion that truly matter. It's a reminder that sometimes the people we least expect are the ones who will surprise us the most, and that everyone deserves a second chance and the opportunity to prove who they really are.